Hey guys, welcome to another Jamaican video, a Jamaican living in Germany. Wow, I haven't said that in a long while and it's so good to actually do another Jamaican video. And this video is another culture shock video, but the interesting thing about this one is a reverse culture shock. So I did a 3-month trip across North America, Central America and South America and even in Africa. And there were so many culture shocks that I had, not because I was Jamaican, but because I've been living in Germany. And that's what I want to tell you all about in this video. I've done quite a few videos about some of the culture shocks that I experienced when I moved to Germany and some of them that I still experience to this very day. And what I didn't expect was just how many culture shocks that I would actually experience traveling to other countries, having lived in Germany for this long. Some of them were actually really surprising for me because they shouldn't really be culture shocks, because coming from Jamaica, some of these things were already normal. But then because I'm living in Germany and I adjusted to a different culture, going to these places, it was like, wow, my mind was blown, although it shouldn't be. So let's dive into the culture shocks. In the United States, I did a road trip for like 2 weeks with some friends of mine. And there were so many culture shocks that just popped up along the way. All the free bathrooms and at the gas stations that you could stop along the way and the rest stops on the highways. Now, coming from Germany where you stop on the autobahn, you're expected, you know you're gonna have to spend some money to use the bathroom. It was like, I was like so surprised, like you just walk into some rest stop, you just walk into a gas station and you can just use the bathroom. You don't even need to pay money for it, and I was like, this is just crazy. While on the highways, it was sometimes a bit annoying for me because I'm like, we're going like so slow, and especially when you're driving through the middle of United States, there's just like nothing there. It's just like roads, and that's pretty much what you see. And in my mind, I'm like, you know, if this was Germany, you would be going like twice as fast.
1,250 feet in the Empire State Building in New York.
Back in Jamaica, we actually use a mixture. So we use both the Imperial system and the metric system. In America, it's all about the Imperial system. And that was a headache for me, like doing all these calculations and stuff, because of course being here and thinking everything in metric, and then in the States, like having to calculate everything and talking with my friends, and they're like talking about miles and talking about Fahrenheit. I'm like, wait a minute, let me calculate what you're talking about. Something I noticed when I went to the States for the first time was like at some stores, they'll ask you for your phone number. This time around, it was like really, you know, surprising for me. It was a big shock for me because in my mind, I'm like, yeah, data security being in Germany, you know, where something like that is not typical. I mean, sometimes they'll ask you, for example, your postal code, but like your phone number is not something, you know, you're paying for something and they just like ask you for it. This is also not something that's popular in Jamaica, where it's like they ask this type of information anyways. So that was like really sometimes creepy for me, like, okay, why do you want my phone number? Now in Central America and South America, there were of course lots of culture shocks. And again, some of these shouldn't have been shocks for me because it's the same way in Jamaica. Storing your bags when you go to the supermarket. So in a lot of these places, a lot of these countries, you're not allowed to take your bags with you into the supermarket or into a lot of stores. So you have to leave your bag there, for example, give it to someone, they give you a number, and then you collect your bag when you're leaving the store. Or some of them, they even had lockers. That was surprising for me because I've never seen that in Jamaica, where you actually have lockers and you just put your stuff inside and you can lock it and you get a key for it. In Germany, that's not typical. I've never experienced that anywhere here. I mean, you go into the supermarket, you go shopping for clothes, for whatever it is, you just walk right into the store and you walk right back out. There's nobody there to collect your bags and there's no security guard standing there. This culture shock is a corona culture shock. In Central America especially, and also in South America, when you would go into the stores, there would always be somebody there, you know, you have to sanitize your hands and all those, checking your temperatures as well. Or they'll just have a machine there, so you check your temperature and you also get some sanitizer. Now, you can just imagine, like if you're walking around searching for stuff or you're shopping for something, And going into 10 different stores, your temperature is gonna get checked like 10 different times, and you're applying like 10 different types of chemicals to your hands. And I have to admit, sometimes I would like try to like, just go inside, but then there would be somebody that's like, no, you gotta do it. Wearing a mask, of course, is typical in most of these countries. In Peru, it's a different level, where they have this double mask rule. So you're going into certain stores, you have to wear 2 masks. And if you're traveling on some public transportation, some buses, then you have to wear 2 masks plus a face shield. No, I was like, what? Wearing 1 mask for most of us is annoying enough. Just imagine you're walking around in such a hot country and you're struggling to breathe because you're wearing like 2 masks. That was the only country I saw where they had such an extreme mask rule where you had to wear 2 masks. For most other places, like 1 mask was sufficient, and they also didn't do as it is done in Germany where you have to have like a medical mask. Especially in the States, like you can wear a mask that's made out of cloth, like an everyday mask. It doesn't have to be a medical mask. So I've mentioned maybe 1 or 2 times about security guards. Quite a culture shock. Shouldn't be a culture shock because it's normal in Jamaica where most of the stores you'd actually have a security guard, someone that's standing there literally from the moment the store opens to the moment it closes. Being back in Central America and also in South America and of course in the States, also these places they have security guards. In Peru it was also a different level because in Lima there was like a certain part of the city, I can't remember the name of it right now, but it's more or less one of the upper class, you could say, part of the city, the safest part, you could say. For me, that was like so weird to just be going for a run, going for a walk, and just to see like security guards just walking about, making sure that everything is okay. I don't know, like for most people, I guess, and especially with people living there, it would make them feel safe. Like, okay, yeah, there's some law enforcement happening. For me, it kind of was the opposite. When I landed in Mexico, that was the biggest culture shock because even like on the buses there, you have security guards. So you have the driver, then you have a security guard. And I think they were actually police officers, if I'm not mistaken. That was just shocking. I was like, why is there a security guard on the bus? When I got into the city, I was walking around pretty much every corner you would go, you would see a police officer or a security guard. And then even at the hostel that I stayed at, like I don't remember seeing at a hostel before this trip where there was like a security guard. All these different things, it was like, wow. Something that maybe we take for granted, especially people living in Germany, where it's like, it's a safe country and you don't need to worry about these different things. But you go to other countries, it's like, you know, this extra burden on your mind. It could not be a culture shock video without talking about punctuality. I had to learn to readjust my expectations. Being in some of these countries where it's like, time doesn't matter. It's just about getting there. There were so many times like I got annoyed because I'm like, yeah, I need to get to a place at a certain time. Living in Germany where a lot of things, most things you can find some information about it, it's documented somewhere, and getting around isn't that hard. In these countries it's different where it's like so many things aren't documented, and even if they're documented, they might not be up to date. The funny things that you ask people sometimes like on the streets, or you ask even like somebody that works at a hostel and they're like, yeah, I don't know. It took some time to readjust to that, to actually find ways to get around this unavailability of information, or when it's actually there, to manage my expectations, to not expect that everything's just going to be punctual and working as I expect it should be. Yeah, that was really hard. Public transportation is the way to go for me. So taking the buses, taking the trains, I actually have no problem with that. And then going to some of these countries, and sometimes they didn't have such developed transportation systems, and so the go-to was Uber. And that was another culture shock because, for example, I've only taken 1 taxi in Germany, and that was when there was a strike. Sitting in a car as the only passenger was somehow shocking for me, because the only time I'm sitting in a car in Germany is if I'm traveling with friends. Being there and taking Uber and just recognizing just how cheap it was sometimes, and how the flexibility that it offered, I was like, whoa, this is like so cool. But at the same time, it bothered me because I'm like, yeah, why am I the only person sitting in? I would definitely prefer to take a bus being all sweaty and a bunch of people that I don't know, because it would be cheaper and it's better for the environment than just me sitting as the only passenger in a car to get somewhere else. Of course, the good old paying with card was surprising for me in a lot of these countries, and I find it interesting sometimes that people talk about, you know, these third world countries, and they make it out to seem like everything there is bad and they don't even know what technology is. A lot of these countries that I visited, they were very advanced in terms of how you could pay for your items, especially paying with card. And in comparison to Germany, it was also surprising just how well this was adapted, where you're buying something on the street, which I saw in Brazil, for example, like these street vendors, they have their products on this cardboard on the street, and there's a card machine right there. If you're buying something from there, you could pay with card. I was like, wow, mind blown. That was like so surprising for me. Just like how well a lot of these countries, they've embraced paying with cards, and that made me happy because I love paying with cards because it's much easier for me to manage my expenses. On the other side, something that was also really surprising for me was going to these banks. Again, coming from Jamaica, seeing long lines at banks is a normal thing. Having lived in Germany for so long, you don't usually see a bank living in Germany, you don't usually see a line at a bank or at an ATM. Usually maybe 1 or 2 people are standing there, but definitely not 10-20 people. That was normal in a lot of these countries, where I remember standing in banks trying to exchange money and I was maybe the 20th person in line or something. That was really surprising for me, like to see just how long some of these lines were, especially for the ATMs. The patience that these people have, I kind of lost it, because standing there I'm like, why is this taking so long? Like, I just want to do one simple thing. Something that was really interesting for me in the African countries that I visited was the simple question, how are you? Now, Germany, that's not typical where people ask you, like, just casually ask you, how are you doing? If they ask you that question, they really want to know, how are you doing? In these countries, it was like, hello, how are you? They're always together. It was in Zimbabwe. Pretty much, if somebody says hello, they're gonna directly say, how are you? Hello, how are you? Everywhere that you go, hello, how are you? And I guess it was the German in me. I was like, I just found it like so weird. Like, you know, everybody's asking, how are you? It was like, the typical answer would be like, I'm fine. And again, it was kind of weird answering the question that way, because then on some days I really wasn't fine, but then I'm like, yeah, everything is fine. So there you have it. Those are the culture shocks that I experienced on this trip traveling across these continents. It was definitely an interesting experience to see just how much my definition of normal has changed, and just interesting to also experience all these different cultures and to learn from them. And yeah, thank you so much for watching my culture shocks video, and see you in the next Jamaican video.